Arthur Callahan never saw himself as a hero. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud. He was the kind of man who showed up early, stayed late, and didn't complain, just worked. For over a decade, he built his life from the ground up, both literally and figuratively. He spent long days in steel-toed boots, walking job sites, solving problems, earning the trust of crews and clients alike. It was exhausting work, but it gave him purpose. He liked knowing that something solid stood because of his hands. But behind the quiet pride, there was pressure, a constant, silent weight on his shoulders. Expectations from his father, competition with his brother Finn, and the drive to never let anyone down. Arthur never asked for help. Not because he thought he didn't need it, but because he didn't know how. Stress became a companion he didn't question. Even at home, with Isla, he often felt like he was carrying more than just the load at work. He was holding their entire life together. Yet he said nothing, did everything, and hoped it would be enough. He didn't realize how much he was slowly losing himself until everything around him started to fall apart. And by then, it was already too late. At first, Arthur thought the changes were small, easy to ignore. Isla started coming home later than usual. She said it was work, or her friend needed her, or she just wanted time to unwind. He believed her. Why wouldn't he? She was his wife, and they had built a life together. But then it wasn't just the late nights. It was the distance in her eyes. The way she smiled at her phone, but barely looked at him across the dinner table. Arthur would lie in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had shifted between them. He blamed himself. Maybe he'd been too tired, too quiet, too focused on work. He wanted to fix things, but Isla had already started to slip away. The loneliness crept in slowly. Not with yelling or slammed doors, but with silence, long stretches of it. Conversations became surface level, filled with empty questions and half-hearted answers. Arthur felt like a ghost in his own home. He missed her even when she was sitting right next to him. And though he tried to hold on, to believe it was just a rough patch, deep down he could feel it. The woman he loved was already somewhere else. The betrayal didn't come like thunder. It crept in like fog. That morning, Arthur had no reason to suspect anything unusual. A delay at the construction site gave him an unexpected break, a rare chance to breathe. He drove home with the thought of surprising Isla, maybe sharing a late lunch or catching a moment together, something they hadn't done in weeks. But the second he turned onto their street and saw Finn's sleek black Audi parked outside, unease settled in his gut. It was a weekday, the middle of the afternoon. Finn had no reason to be there. Arthur's steps were slow, uncertain, his heart already sensing what his mind refused to believe. Inside the house, the air was too still. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. Soft music drifting from upstairs, Isla's playlist. The one she only used when she wanted to set a mood. Clothes draped over furniture like carelessly shed skins. Then the sounds. Intimate, undeniable. Each step up the stairs felt like walking into a dream turned nightmare. And there they were, Isla and Finn, tangled in bedsheets that once represented a shared life. In that moment, Arthur's world cracked open. Time didn't stop. It simply lost meaning. There was no anger at first, just silence. The kind that empties your lungs and leaves nothing but a hollow ache. When Finn stammered, "I can explain," Arthur barely heard him. The explanation didn't matter. The damage was already done. Trust, once broken, doesn't shatter, it dissolves. And Arthur could feel it slipping away with every breath. In the days that followed, Arthur felt like he was moving through molasses, thick, slow, heavy. Nothing felt real. The world kept spinning. But he was frozen in the wreckage. He slept in the guest room at his parents' house, though sleep was a generous word. Most nights he stared at the ceiling, mind replaying every detail, every sign he had missed. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had dulled into something worse, a constant ache, a sense of hollowness that clung to his ribs. His mother's reaction made it worse. Instead of holding him, instead of mourning what had been lost, she defended Finn. "You hit your brother?" she asked, eyes wide, voice sharp. "Not are you okay? Not how could they do this to you?" The moment she took Finn's side, Arthur realized the loneliness went deeper than marriage. Even in his own family, he was second place. Only his father stood firm, quiet but fierce in his support. He fired Finn from the company, locked down the office, and called in the family lawyer. But nothing could undo what had been broken. When the divorce papers arrived, unannounced and cold, it felt like the final insult. As if Isla hadn't already torn their vows apart. Now she wanted half of everything. His house, his future, even his share of the company he'd bled for. Then came Finn's charges. Assault. Arthur couldn't believe it. The man who betrayed him now wanted to punish him for reacting. It was grief stacked on betrayal, until Arthur could barely breathe. Arthur's new condo sat on the 7th floor of a quiet, brick building tucked just far enough on the downtown bus. It was modern, efficient, clean, and absolutely lifeless. The first night he walked in, the space felt like a stranger. No scent of home-cooked meals, no soft laughter drifting from another room, just blank walls and silence, so loud it echoed. He unpacked slowly, one box at a time, but even the act of decorating felt pointless. The bed was too big, the couch too stiff, the fridge too empty. Most nights, Arthur stood by the window long after sunset, looking out at the city's twinkling lights, wondering how everything had unraveled so fast. Work became his only anchor. He threw himself into it like a drowning man clings to driftwood. His promotion to executive vice president should have felt like a win, but came wrapped in grief, handed to him because Finn had been banished. Still, Arthur showed up every day, steadied by his father's quiet presence and the unspoken understanding between them. For the first time, they talked about more than job sites. They talked about risk, about legacy, about how failure shapes a man. Slowly, purpose replaced pain. Arthur began to see that healing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was in the quiet rituals. Morning coffee brewed, just how he liked, a favorite album playing on Sunday mornings. The slow return of sleep without nightmares. The life he had built with Isla was gone. But the life he was building alone? It was his. The knock on the door came just after sunset. Soft, hesitant. Like a ghost asking permission to haunt. Arthur wasn't expecting anyone, and when he checked the peephole, the sight made his breath catch. Isla. She looked nothing like the confident, composed woman he once married. Her eyes were swollen, cheeks pale, hair unkempt. She looked like grief incarnate. He opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Her voice trembled as she began to speak, words tumbling over each other, apologies laced with sobs, regret woven into every syllable. She told him everything. How she and Finn had tried to turn betrayal into a fairy tale, convinced their connection justified the wreckage they left behind. How reality had torn through their fantasy like rust through steel. Finn was gone, vanished, left her with a note, no explanation, just fear and a child growing inside her. Pregnant, broke, and abandoned, she stood at Arthur's door not for love, but for rescue. Arthur listened, stone-faced, a quiet storm behind his eyes. The irony stung. She had torn his life apart and now asked him to help mend hers. When she asked for financial help, for the baby's sake, Arthur felt something inside him finally settle. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a clarity born of suffering. Was it worth it? He asked. She couldn't answer, and he didn't wait for one. With a calm she hadn't earned, he simply said, "Deal with the consequences." Then he closed the door, sealing off a chapter that no longer belonged to him. That night, after Isla walked away for the last time, Arthur didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't even pour a drink. He simply stood there, back against the door, breathing in the stillness. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something close. For the first time in months, there was no noise clawing at his thoughts. No ache in his chest from what-ifs or should-haves. Just quiet, the kind that doesn't demand answers. He called his father and told him everything about Isla's visit, the baby, the plea for help. His father's voice was steady, unsurprised. "Let them lie in the bed they made," he said. "You've already paid more than your share." Those words sank deep. Arthur had always carried the weight for everyone else, for Finn, for Isla, even for his mother, who still clung to the fantasy of a united family. But not anymore. The next morning, Arthur opened the blinds in his condo and let the light flood in. He brewed coffee. He sat on the couch and made a list, not of things to fix, but things to build. A garden on the balcony. A weekend hike. Maybe a dog. He didn't know what life ahead would look like, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something almost like hope. What Isla and Finn destroyed was real, but what Arthur could create from the rubble would be even more so. Not a return to who he was, but a rise into who he was always meant to become. In the months that followed, Arthur poured every ounce of himself into the company. He worked tirelessly, not just to keep the business afloat, but to restore its reputation after Finn's departure. Clients who had been wary began to return, reassured by Arthur's quiet strength and unwavering follow-through. He wasn't flashy like his brother, but he was solid, dependable, the kind of man who did what he said and meant every word. The office became his sanctuary. Spreadsheets, meetings, phone calls, it all gave him purpose, a reason to get up each morning. But beyond the numbers and contracts, something more meaningful was unfolding. His relationship with his father. For years, they had spoken mostly in work talk and half-smiles. But now, as they sat side by side late into the evening, reviewing forecasts and sharing takeout dinners, Arthur began to see the man behind the title. His father told him stories about near bankruptcies, impossible decisions, sleepless nights, the battles he'd never shared before. And Arthur listened, not just as a son, but as a man preparing to carry the torch. The promotion to executive vice president no longer felt like a band-aid over betrayal. It felt earned. Each day, Arthur was building something stronger than what came before. A new foundation, not just of concrete and steel, but of character, trust, and resilience. The company wasn't just a business anymore. It was legacy, and Arthur, after losing everything he thought mattered, had finally stepped into a future that was truly his own. Arthur had always believed that closure came with answers, with apologies, explanations, some grand conversation that would finally make sense of the pain. But as the months passed, he realized that closure was much quieter. It was found in long walks alone, in morning coffees on the balcony, in choosing not to pick up the phone when it rang with a familiar name. He had blocked Isla and Finn from every corner of his digital life, deleted their numbers, erased their photos, not out of spite, but out of necessity. What had once been memories now felt like ghosts, and he refused to keep letting them haunt him. The world had continued turning without them. His evenings were no longer weighed down by arguments or awkward silences. Instead, they were filled with jazz records, open windows, and the soft scratch of pen on paper as he began journaling, a practice he never imagined would bring peace. It wasn't a fast healing. Some days, the grief still surfaced like a bruise you forgot was there until something touched it. But over time, Arthur began to feel whole again, not because someone else completed him, but because he stopped waiting to be saved. He had rescued himself, and that realization, that strength, became the bedrock for everything that came next. What once had been a life torn apart now became the soil from which something better could grow. Not perfect, not painless, but real and rooted. And this time, no one could take it from him. In the end, Arthur didn't seek revenge. He simply outgrew the wreckage they left behind. While Finn spiraled from job to job, dragging his broken reputation behind him like an anchor, and Isla faded into the background of a life she'd sabotaged, Arthur thrived. The life they once shared was reduced to dust and court documents, but from that dust, he built something stronger. His father's words echoed in his mind. The best revenge is living well. And that's exactly what Arthur did. He didn't just survive, he evolved. The man who once clung to the hope of stability became someone who welcomed growth, even when it hurt. He furnished his condo not to impress, but to reflect who he was becoming. Minimal, intentional. Calm. He planted herbs on the balcony, adopted a scrappy rescue dog named Mako, and found joy in the little routines of his new life. He no longer saw himself as broken, but battle-tested. And when people asked about Isla or Finn, he simply smiled and said they were a chapter, not the whole story, because in truth they were. His story wasn't one of betrayal anymore. It was one of reclamation, of quiet victory, and of finally becoming the man he was always meant to be. In today's world, betrayal and heartbreak can feel like the end, but they're often the beginning of something stronger. Arthur's story is a reminder that even when trust is shattered and life falls apart, we have the power to rebuild. The key is setting boundaries, standing firm in your worth, and choosing growth over revenge. Let go of what no longer serves you, no matter how deeply it once mattered. Pain will pass, but your integrity stays. When people show you who they are, believe them, and choose peace, not chaos. In the silence that follows, you just might find yourself again.